Jehoshaphat, flawed but faithful. You can find the account of the story of his life in 1 Kings chapter 22 verses 1 to 50, 2 Kings chapter 3 and 2 Chronicles chapters 17 to 20. Jehoshaphat was a king who reigned in the southern kingdom of Israel, or the southern kingdom of Judah, for 25 years, 3 of which were as co-regent. He inherited the kingdom from his father Asa, who largely followed God, but faltered late on, turning from what was right and refusing to be corrected, and who seemed to die a bitter man. Jehoshaphat was a faithful follower of God. He seemed to stay loyal to his Lord all his life, although some of the decisions he made were questionable and lacking in wisdom, to say the least. He had great intentions, not just serving God himself, but also wanting the people of the land to walk in the same faith. In 2 Chronicles chapter 17, it tells us that he sent some of the Levites, who are of the priestly tribe, and other officials to teach from the book of the law in all the towns of Judah, and broke down the statues and other idols set up for the worship of other gods. It seemed that he also carried the favour of his people, as they were only too willing to bring him gifts, suggesting that he governed with wisdom and fairness to all. He also strengthened his army, so that he would not need to rely on the mercy or favour of any of the surrounding nations. Consequently, the nation in his time grew in prosperity and fame and was at peace. However, Jehoshaphat had a blind spot. He desired peace and good relations with the northern kingdom of Israel, the sister state of Judah. The problem was that at the time Jehoshaphat became king, the most wicked king of all was on the throne of that northern kingdom of Israel, and his name was Ahab. Jehoshaphat foolishly made an alliance with him and by proxy with his even more wicked wife Jezebel. They went to war together against the Arameans in order to retake a border town called Ramoth Gilead, which had been captured in a previous battle. This battle cost Ahab his life, and almost Jehoshaphat's too. We might wonder why Jehoshaphat was even there. The account unusually is found almost identically in both 2 Chronicles chapter 18 and 1 Kings chapter 22, and is shocking in that Jehoshaphat seems to be the junior partner in a war he really did not need to be involved in. It also seems unlike him not to listen to the one godly prophet, Micaiah, who warns them about going into the battle. Sadly, Jehoshaphat compounded his mistake by allowing his son Jehoram to marry Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. By all accounts, Athaliah was as wicked as her mother and would narrowly fail to wipe out the whole line of David, which was the line of the kings of Judah, in rage and spite after her son Ahaziah and mother Jezebel's death at the hands of yet another king called Jehu. Chastened from this experience, Jehoshaphat, on his return home, was berated by a prophet who conveniently was also called Jehu, who warned him that the Lord's anger was upon him. At this point, Jehoshaphat's response is crucial, and to his credit, he responded by doubling up his efforts to turn his people back to the worship of their one true God, and also in ensuring that justice was done in his land. This was all good, but it does seem that from this point, God's protection was removed from the land, because shortly afterwards, the surrounding nations declared war on Judah and sent their combined armies to attack Jerusalem, its capital. This was another test of Jehoshaphat's faith in and dependence on God. He again responded well, as although terrified, Jehoshaphat begged the Lord for guidance. He also ordered everyone in Judah to begin fasting. It tells us in 2 Chronicles chapter 20 verse 3. He didn't run for outside help, but entrusted himself, his people and his land to the Lord. The aim of the fast was to focus on God and plead for his help. The people were then gathered together for unity and fellowship. After this, he took personal responsibility by praying to God in front of the people, thanking him for his goodness, reminding God of his promises made at the temple's consecration in the time of King Solomon much earlier, and asking for justice as the enemies were attacking without cause or reason. Basically speaking, he professed his and his nation's complete dependence on God. God graciously assured through the anointed prophet Jehaziel that he would rescue them and that they wouldn't even need to fight. Jehoshaphat's response to this encouraging message was with faith and good leadership. He appointed people to praise in advance with the words, perhaps taken from the chorus of Psalm 136, "Give thanks to the Lord, his faithful love endures forever." That's 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 21. And during that step of faith, the enemy armies imploded, fighting among themselves and slaughtering one another. After that miraculous turn of events, no doubt at God's hand, Jehoshaphat led the people in praise and thanks to God, both on the battlefield and when they returned to Jerusalem, ensuring that neither he nor anyone else took the credit. Thus the fear of God, rather than the fear of Jehoshaphat or of Israel, came over the surrounding nations. Nevertheless, Jehoshaphat could not shake off his relations with Israel. He even set up a joint venture with Ahab's son Ahaziah, not to be confused with Jehoshaphat's grandson and later king of Judah of the same name, in using ships to trade in together. But these plans were doomed to failure. Interestingly, 2 Chronicles chapter 20 records that God destroyed these efforts, whereas 1 Kings chapter 22 suggests that Jehoshaphat had in fact refused eventually to cooperate with Ahaziah. Whatever the exact scenario, both accounts agree that the venture was doomed to failure and that God was not pleased with it. So what can we learn from the life of King Jehoshaphat to think about? Jehoshaphat was a man of God who took the good and not the bad from his father Asa. He avoided the pitfalls of his father's pride late in his life and presumably saw the harm it did to his reputation, character, and for the future of his nation. Our parents invariably have or had good and bad qualities which will inevitably shape us. How can we endeavour to learn from and mirror their good points while striving to avoid their bad points and errors? Jehoshaphat desired that his people know God and fight for justice. This is a wonderful example to follow. He ensured he had a good relationship with God, but he also desired that others had the same. In both our witness to non-believers and also the influence we have on the lives of our fellow believers, we should be striving that all come to know God and become more like him. This should be evident in our actions as well as our words, as we look to make a difference in the world in terms of justice and righteousness, as well as promoting the gospel message itself of salvation through Jesus Christ our Lord. Jehoshaphat's weakness, or Achilles' heel, was his closeness to Ahab. Did he think he could influence him or even save him? Perhaps. But there is a danger of being yoked to unbelievers. The Apostle Paul talks about this in the New Testament in one of his letters to the church in Corinth, in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 to 16. We need wisdom in our relationships with unbelievers, not just with regards to who we marry, but in all walks of life. A healthy benchmark is to assess whether we are or are likely to be influencing them more, or whether we are being influenced by them more. If it's the latter, then we need to be humble and wise, keep our distance, and perhaps even steer clear. Psalm 1 verse 1 speaks of the danger of ungodly influence when it says, "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with mockers." Billy Graham is also a salutary lesson here. A great man of God, used amazingly to bring the gospel and indeed salvation to millions. I myself am one of those who will be eternally grateful for his ministry, having attended one of his meetings at Wembley Stadium, London, England in 1989, and later on praying a prayer of commitment in his organisation's Decision magazine. However, in my opinion, his weak point was his closeness to those in political power. He no doubt saw his exalted position in American society as an opportunity to influence for good, indeed for God, those in the highest echelons of power. However, the reality was that it became something of a distraction to him throughout his ministry, and potentially even clouded his judgment. This was particularly true of his relationship with President Nixon, who of course had to leave office in disgrace after the Watergate scandal. And Billy Graham's reputation was also damaged, nearly irreparably, due to his association with him and earlier endorsement of him. Jehoshaphat was also an example, in a very good way of course, of someone willing to listen to rebuke and challenge. He was willing to humble himself and not be bitter, in sad contrast to his father, but to change his ways, to turn around and choose a new and better path. Because of this, he was still able to experience great blessings and works of wonder at God's hand. A flawed man, yes, particularly in his judgment of people at times, and possibly overly naive in his dealings with people, but equally someone I think we can look up to as a person who made mistakes like we all do, but was willing to learn from them.